It took exactly 47 seconds for Senator Chris Van Holland to dismantle two of the most powerful officials in the Trump administration using nothing more than a calendar, a calculator, and the kind of prosecutorial precision that ends careers on live television. What followed wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in how truth can unravel even the most carefully crafted deceptions. March 15, 2025. Senate Appropriations Committee hearing room. The mahogany-paneled walls seemed to swallow sound as camera crews made their final adjustments. FBI Director Patel entered with his usual confidence, but this time he wasn't alone. Attorney General Bondi followed, moving with the practiced composure of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. Both believed they were ready for routine budget questions. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. But this story began 3 weeks earlier. In a cramped Senate office where Van Holland's chief of staff, Maria Santos, had been pulling all-nighters that would make any law student weep. Her desk was buried under documents revealing systematic deception, missing funds, and agencies operating beyond the law. "Senator," Santos said, sliding a timeline across his desk at 2 a.m., "we found something that's going to make your prosecutorial instincts very happy." Van Holland, a former prosecutor known for dismantling white-collar crime rings with cold precision, studied the documents with the same methodical focus that had made him legendary in Maryland courtrooms. The pattern was clear and devastating. The FBI was 54 days late in submitting legally required budget documents. Not 5, not 15, 54 days past a deadline carrying serious legal implications. And that was only the beginning. "Show me the money trail," Van Holland said, his tone sharpening. Santos opened a thick folder labeled Confidential Budget Analysis. Inside were spreadsheets that could make any government accountant sweat. The FBI's true operational needs were $1.2 billion higher than what they had reported in their budget request. They knew it. The DOJ knew it. And both seemed confident Congress wouldn't notice. "They're concealing over $1 billion in real costs," Santos explained, tracing red lines across the figures. "And here's the kicker. Patel testified in the House yesterday that they need that exact amount. He admitted it on record." Van Holland's eyes lit up with the satisfaction of a prosecutor sensing a confession. "So they're claiming their budget is sufficient while publicly saying they need $1 billion more?" "That's not all," Santos continued, pulling another document from the pile. "Bondi's office has been coordinating with FBI leadership to delay the spend plan submission. We have emails. Those emails were political dynamite. Internal DOJ messages showing Bondi's staff advising the FBI on how to manage expectations around budget transparency. Legal memos debated whether they could invoke executive privilege over documents explicitly required by law. But what made Van Holland's pulse quicken was the final piece of evidence, a recorded phone call between Bondi and Patel, leaked by a whistleblower. In it, they discussed the Van Holland problem and strategies to stall congressional oversight. "This isn't just about money," Van Holland said quietly, recognizing the pattern of a cover-up. "This is about two federal officials obstructing Congress. That's constitutional crisis territory." Meanwhile, Bondi was facing pressure that would have broken most politicians. In her Justice Department office, surrounded by portraits of attorneys general who had never endured such scrutiny, she reviewed talking points with her communications director. "The Van Holland hearing will be tough," her aide warned. "He's former law enforcement. He knows how to build cases." Bondi waved him off, forcing a smile. "I've handled tougher critics than some suburban prosecutor turned senator." But privately, she was uneasy. The entire delay strategy had been her idea: stall, deflect, and run out the fiscal year clock. What once seemed like a clever maneuver to avoid oversight had become a liability. Every day of delay made the eventual fallout worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patel. "Meeting at 7 p.m. We need to align our stories." The meeting took place in a secure DOJ conference room fitted with electronic jammers and one-way glass. Patel looked exhausted, his normally sharp appearance showing cracks. "The House testimony was a mistake," Bondi said bluntly. "Admitting we need another billion was terrible timing." Patel's jaw tightened. "Would you prefer I lie to Congress?" "I'd prefer you coordinate with DOJ before contradicting our budget plan," Bondi snapped. Now Van Holland has ammunition. They spent 3 tense hours crafting a unified defense. Patel would insist the budget estimates were fluid and evolving, while Bondi would stress the complexity of interagency coordination before final submission. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos had documented every contradiction, every delay, every excuse, building a timeline that made their coordination look like deliberate obstruction. The night before the hearing, Van Holland received a call that changed everything. A senior FBI official, speaking anonymously over an encrypted line, confirmed that leadership had been ordered to delay budget submissions until the hearings ended. "Senator," the voice said, "they're not just hiding money. They're hiding how they're spending it. Some of these operations would never be approved if Congress knew." The next morning, the hearing room felt charged with a quiet intensity that seasoned Capitol Hill reporters recognized instantly. Van Holland entered carrying a slim leather briefcase packed with evidence strong enough to end careers. Pam Bondi and Kash Patel entered together, projecting unity, and to Van Holland, looking more like co-defendants than colleagues. The first hour went as expected. Republican members offered soft, pre-scripted questions about crime and counterterrorism. Patel and Bondi responded smoothly, confident and polished. Exactly the image senior law enforcement officials are supposed to project. Democrats pressed harder, but their questions stayed within predictable oversight lines: surveillance, civil liberties, coordination between agencies. Bondi and Patel navigated each easily. Van Holland stayed silent, taking notes, letting others burn through their time. He waited for precision. At exactly 11:32 a.m., he began. "Director Patel, Attorney General Bondi," he said evenly. "Let's start with something simple." Both nodded, visibly relaxing after the morning's combative exchanges. "When Congress passed the continuing resolution," Van Holland continued, "we required agencies to provide their spend plans within 45 days. He held up a calendar, ensuring every camera caught it. "We are now 54 days past that deadline. Not 5, not 15, 54. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Patel's posture stiffened. "Director Patel, that means you are in violation of federal law. Not policy, not administrative guidance, but law. Do you dispute that?" Patel hesitated. Before he could answer, Bondi leaned into her mic. "Senator, if I may," she began smoothly. "The spend plan process involves complex coordination among multiple agencies. We want to ensure accuracy before submission." Van Holland's eyes stayed fixed on Patel. "I'm not asking the Attorney General," he said sharply. "I'll get to her shortly. I'm asking the FBI director why he's breaking federal law." The directness hit like a hammer. Patel swallowed hard. "Senator, we're working with OMB to finalize documentation. It's an interagency process." "Director Patel," Van Holland cut in, voice rising just enough to dominate the room. "Are you familiar with 31 U.S.C. Paragraph 341, the Anti-Deficiency Act?" Patel blinked, caught off guard. The act carries criminal penalties for officials who violate budget law because ignoring congressionally mandated reporting requirements isn't just bureaucratic negligence. It's a potential crime. It's a federal crime. The word crime electrified the room like a lightning strike. "Now, Attorney General Bondi," Van Holland continued, not missing a beat, "let's talk about your role in this violation." He reached for another document stamped with red classification marks. "We have internal DOJ communications showing that your office advised FBI leadership to delay congressional budget submissions. Would you like to explain why the Attorney General of the United States is directing agencies to break federal law?" Bondi's composure faltered for the first time. "Senator, I reject that characterization. We provide legal guidance on proper procedures." Proper procedures, Van Holland shot back, would mean submitting required documents on time, not coordinating strategies to delay them. He held up an email printout. This is from your Chief of Staff to Director Patel's office, dated February 18th. Quote, DOJ recommends strategic timeline management for congressional submissions to maximize negotiating position. End quote. Bondi's face went pale. Internal DOJ emails weren't supposed to reach Congress without subpoenas. That sounds less like legal guidance and more like obstruction. Patel tried to regain control. Senator, the budget process is complicated. Complicated? Van Holland cut in, his voice rising. Director Patel, yesterday you testified to the House that the FBI needs an additional $1.2 billion to meet operational needs. Yet today, you're claiming your budget submission is sufficient. Which statement was false? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Patel had walked himself into a contradiction. The budget process involves estimates that can evolve. Evolve by $1.2 billion overnight? Van Holland pressed. His instincts were in full prosecutorial mode now. Or did you lie to Congress yesterday about your operational needs? Bondi leaned forward, trying to rescue the exchange. Senator, budget estimates naturally shift with changing threat assessments. Attorney General, Van Holland said, calm but devastating. I didn't ask you, but since you've chosen to speak, did you coordinate with Director Patel to provide false budget information to Congress? The question offered no safe answer. Admit coordination and it was conspiracy. Deny it, and it implied Patel had acted alone, incompetently. We provide legal guidance within proper channels, Bondi said weakly. That's not what I asked. Did you coordinate to deceive Congress about FBI budget needs? Silence followed. 15 long seconds broadcast live across the nation. I'm waiting for an answer, Attorney General. Bondi finally replied, voice barely audible. We coordinated on proper procedures for budget submissions. Van Holland's expression sharpened into the satisfied look of a prosecutor hearing a confession. So you did coordinate. Thank you for confirming that. He reached for a thick folder, the political equivalent of a nuclear device. Let me read from a recorded conversation between you two, obtained through whistleblower channels. Both witnesses froze. Recorded conversations end careers and start investigations. Attorney General Bondi, Van Holland read, quote, we need to run out the clock on Van Holland's oversight. If we delay until after recess, we can control the narrative. Director Patel responds, how long can we legally stall? Your answer, legal is whatever we can defend publicly, end quote. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Republican members looked uneasy. That call took place on February 12th, 3 days before your submission deadline. You weren't ensuring accuracy. You were obstructing oversight. Patel's voice cracked. That conversation is taken out of context. What context, Van Holland snapped, makes obstructing Congress acceptable? Director, we were discussing timeline management. You were discussing how to break federal law without getting caught, Van Holland said with surgical precision. And you've just admitted it on national television. Bondi tried one final defense. Senator, those conversations were privileged attorney-client discussions between two federal officials planning to obstruct oversight. Van Holland interrupted. That's not privilege, Attorney General. That's conspiracy. The aftermath was chaos, but a quiet, surgical kind. Everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed history. In the press gallery, reporters filed breaking alerts before the hearing even ended. 47 a.m., Associated Press, FBI Director, Attorney General caught planning budget obstruction. CNN. Van Holland exposes Bondi Patel conspiracy live on air. By 11:52, budget conspiracy was trending with over 75,000 mentions. At FBI headquarters, Assistant Director Sarah Chen fielded panicked calls from across the country. Agents gathered around screens in disbelief. This is catastrophic, said the Detroit field director. Half my agents are asking if they're working for criminals. Within 2 hours, 3 Republican senators issued statements expressing grave concern. Senator Susan Collins, who had voted to confirm both officials, released the strongest rebuke. Federal law enforcement must operate within the law, not above it. What we witnessed today suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of constitutional accountability. Even conservative media struggled to defend the indefensible. Fox News hosts faltered, unable to spin recorded evidence of obstruction. Tucker Carlson opened his show with an unusually stern tone. When law enforcement leaders conspire to break the law, this isn't politics, it's about the rule of law itself. Video clips spread at record speed. Within 8 hours, the Bondi Patel exchange hit 25 million views. Law and order trended online, though not in the way Republicans hoped. 3 days later, the Department of Justice Inspector General launched a formal investigation into budget obstruction. The Senate Judiciary Committee followed with subpoenas for all DOJ-FBI communications related to congressional oversight. A week after the hearing, the first resignations came. 2 senior DOJ officials stepped down for personal reasons. FBI Deputy Director Mark Williams requested reassignment, writing that he could not serve under current leadership. But the real shockwave hit 10 days after Van Holland's surgical dismantling. Federal judge ruled that violations of the Anti-Deficiency Act constituted criminal conduct requiring a special prosecutor. Within hours, both Pam Bondi and Cash Patel resigned. Bondi's letter cited false portrayals of standard coordination. Patel's blamed political weaponization of budget oversight. Neither mentioned what millions had seen live. 2 senior officials exposed lying to Congress and conspiring to obstruct it. Trump's public response was predictably defiant. Bondi and Patel are victims of the same deep state forces that targeted me. Privately, insiders said he was furious, blaming their incompetence for igniting another political crisis. The special prosecutor, former U.S. Attorney Barbara Jones, moved quickly. Within 6 weeks, a federal grand jury issued indictments for obstruction of Congress, conspiracy to violate budget law, and perjury. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't rhetoric. It's evidence presented so clearly that denial becomes impossible. Senator Van Holland had done exactly that. He didn't just expose 2 officials unfit for office. He revealed a broader culture within the administration, one that believed it stood above the law. The conspiracy was real. The obstruction was documented. The perjury was undeniable. And in just 47 seconds of precise questioning, Chris Van Holland proved that truth still has the power to destroy corruption. In the end, Bondi and Patel didn't just lose their jobs. They lost their freedom. The special prosecutor's case led to convictions. The first Attorney General and FBI, director in American history imprisoned for obstructing Congress. As Van Holland left the hearing room, his final words became the epitaph for their careers. The law applies to everyone, especially those sworn to enforce it. Today we proved that no one is above accountability. The $1.2 billion they tried to hide turned out to be the least of their problems. Justice, it seemed, was far more expensive.